A very, very good evening to everyone. Firstly, I must say that I joined Ponds in 1990, and unfortunately for me, Mr. V. Narayanan was there only for a couple of months, and Mr. Balraman then took over as managing director. But I had the good fortune of meeting him even before I joined Ponds. I haven't told you the story. He was a very dear friend of my uncle's, and my uncle actually lived in his house in Cenotaph Road. And well before I joined, I was in college, and my uncle had invited me over for dinner. So I met him then, and he regaled us with stories. That was, of course, in a different context. But my memories of Ponds are very dear. And when Mr. Balraman asked me to come here, I just can't say no to him, so I'm here. Well, I want to just share with you some of the lessons I've learned. And now these lessons may be relevant for some of you, but equally may not be relevant for some of you. But I wanted to distill what happened within the telecom industry to really try and pull out what are the lessons that we've learned. So Airtel is a young company. We launched in 1995, and we started in Delhi. And by 2010 or 11, we were pretty much a national company. In 2016, India, with a revenue market share of about 30%. It was a very fragmented market, 10 players. And in telecom, you need few players because you have limited spectrum. Spectrum is a resource pool on which telecom networks work. So you need few players in order to make sure that you use the spectrum well. But India had a strange situation when you had 3 players, which accounted for about 80% of the market, with just 20% of spectrum, and another 7 players with 20% of the market and 80% of the spectrum, which means the spectrum resource that was available, which is a scarce resource, was very poorly distributed amongst the players. And then along came Reliance Jio in 2016, and it was an absolute onslaught that happened in the industry. So this was one of the few industries globally where services were run for free for almost 9 months. You had people queuing up in shops, and anything that you give away in free in India is obviously very valuable. So you had people queuing up in shops and taking away the Jio services. The rollout, remember, telecom is a very capex-heavy business. The product that you sell is actually air. You can't smell it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. And really what the product is the capital that you put to actually build the networks, and that's very heavy investments. This was the first time in the world that a new player had come in and put in more capex than the incumbent players. So we had invested about $20 billion up to that point in time, 2016, and they came in with an investment of $40 billion. So overnight, they had doubled the capacity, they had more towers than us, they had more fiber. Fiber is the heart around which all networks work, very heavy investments required there. And they had far more capacity than us. We were subjected to a series of regulatory shocks. Almost $7 billion was effectively wiped out. $1 billion which was effectively transferred from us to the other players. Another $6 billion that hit us as legal fees for cases that we had won in many courts below, in the smaller courts, in the high courts, and so on and so forth. And consolidation was dramatic. So the 10 players went down to 3 players, effectively. People were bankrupted overnight. I remember the offices of Aircel had people queuing up, demanding money, distributors throwing stones at the offices. Reliance Communication, which was a large company at that time, went into bankruptcy. Telenor, which was one of the largest Scandinavian operators across the Scandinavian markets, effectively shut shop, handed over the keys to us. Tata Communications, again from the large conglomerate that's Tata, went bankrupt. So this series of bankruptcy hit many of these players. The number 2 and number 3 player, which was Vodafone and Idea, merged together to effectively become the number 1 player. They ended up with a 45% market share. We were at 30%, and Reliance had still just about started pricing. Given the low prices that were operating, the market, which was about $32 billion, about 240,000 odd crores, effectively became $22 billion. So 33% of the market revenue evaporated because of the low pricing. And the capital that had to go in, of 100 rupees of revenue that we were earning, we had to start putting 50 rupees as revenue, as capex. So just imagine, you've got a 100 rupee business, you have about 50 rupees of operating cost, you're effectively left with 50 rupees of cash flow, but you're putting back 50 rupees into capital, taxes are separate, so we were deep in the red. In effect, what happened was three things. The penetration of smartphones went from almost nothing to 70% in a 3 to 4 year period. The usage per customer of gigabytes of data went from 0.8 gigabytes to 23 gigabytes a month, which meant more and more capacities. And the rate per gigabyte went from 250 rupees to 6 rupees. This was the perfect storm that really happened in that 3 year period between 2016 and 19. Today, where Airtel is that 30% market share which we had at the point of leadership is today 40%, 4 years out. The revenue in the last 4 years has doubled from about 50,000 crores to 108,000 crores. The EBITDA, which is the measure of profitability, has more or less tripled from around 18,000 crores to 55,000 crores. And the market cap, which is an outcome of all of this, has gone from $20 billion to about $80 billion. But the other thing that I'm also quite amazed by is our non-wireless contribution, because we were a very mobility-centric company. We were very heavily dependent on the mobile business, which is about 85% of our business at the time. The non-mobility business, which was about 15% contribution, has now become almost 25%. So we have a stronger and more resilient portfolio. And we also have a range of digital services. For example, we have our own payments bank, which is a thin bank, which, where you can remit money and do things like that. It's the only profitable fintech player. We've got a very large data center business. So while all of this is happening, we also built some of these businesses. Now, I want to say the lessons that I've learned, there are 4 lessons that I've learned out of this whole exercise. And I think they are applicable not just at moments of disruption, because when I look back, I wish we had absorbed these lessons even before all of this had happened. The first lesson I would say is the tone and mindset. I think for me, the battle is fought in the mind first before it's fought in the marketplace. I believe that is really, really important. And, I'll tell you what we really felt. We felt, and I remember standing up in 2019 addressing the whole company. We have these leadership meetings once a year. And I put up 2 charts. One was a chart with very stormy seas, which is exactly what we were encountering. And I said that this is actually a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Because we knew that what we could not do for 20 years was going to happen in the next literally year or 2, which is a dramatic consolidation of the industry. So 10 players coming down to 3 was something that we knew would happen, because you needed nerves of steel and you needed enormous capital to survive this onslaught. We had to, by the way, raise $15 billion of capital to fight this battle and strengthen our balance sheet. We had a rights issue. We had to dilute promoter holdings. We had to raise a series of perpetual bonds, so a whole bunch of things to actually raise capital. But the second area around tone and mindset is also the metrics that you set. When you know that your revenue is going to fall, and it's going to fall by 20%, 30%, what are the targets that you set your teams? You set a target of -10 revenue, -20 revenue. It's a really, really tough question. And you remember, if revenue is going to fall, margins are going to fall. And if all our operating units, we have today 14 operating units across the country. Tarun leads one of them in Tamil Nadu. All our operating units are measured on the basis of revenue and margin and market share. So if revenue is going to fall, margin is going to fall. How do you set targets that make people feel like losers every day? And therefore, I think we had a really deep conversation at the board. And I said to the board that, let me be the only one who carries the target of revenue and margin. But the team should not carry a revenue and margin target, because we can't have them feel like losers every day. So we actually put 2 targets, which were what I would call more controllable targets. Market share, which is a barometer of your competitive performance. And in a scale business where you have a lot of financial capital needed, you need big scale. Market share, even though the market is going to fall, the revenue is going to fall. And cost, which you could control. So your own cost and market share. These were the only 2 targets we set for all the operating teams. and I was carrying the revenue and margin target. And I think the consequence of that is that people felt, even at a point when things were going down, and if you're in the operations and you're looking at the sales numbers every day, you're seeing it go down, people did feel that at least they were pushing towards what it is that they needed to do in contributing towards the company. So I think the first thing that I would say is tone and mindset, and I contrast this with Vodafone Idea, who was much larger than us at that point in time with 44% share. Their target was that we were going to defend share. And if you say you're going to defend share, you're inevitably going to lose market share. But if you say you want to win share, then chances are at least you will hold share. So through that battle, we came out actually in those first 2 years not losing market share. The second thing I would call out as a big lesson that we learned is we had to be very, very clear about which customer segment we were going to go after. You know, you're competing here with a player that has almost infinite, like Mr. Balraman said, infinite amount of capital. It's a bottomless pit of a big, big balance sheet, which is being funded by many businesses that the company is running. They have regulatory muscle, they have regulatory clout. So if you compete on their terms, then you're going to lose. And so how do you compete to win the best quality customers is really what we decided that we would do. In India, about 35% of customers account for 70 to 80% of revenue. 245 districts out of the 770 districts give the industry almost 80% of the revenue. We said we will be absolutely focused on just these 245 districts. We're going to forget about the other 450 districts. We are going to be very clear that we want the best quality customers. This was a very, very big call to take. And for a group of people who had built the company for 21 years, who had thought exactly the opposite up to that point in time, how do you convince them and how do you persuade them to actually make the shift? So we made a very bold move to say we're going to shed customers. So at that point in time, we had 289 million customers, and we put in an entry price plan, which is like a surrogate plan, where we knew we were going to lose about 60 million customers. Finally, we ended up losing 50 million, but we actually shed 50 million customers, which was a very, very big call for us to take. And what it did was it unclogged a lot of our networks because these were customers who were just receiving incoming calls. But more importantly, it persuaded everybody in the organization that we were serious about what we were trying to do. At the same time, we put all our energies, as I said, all our limited capital into these 245 districts and said, here we are going to be better than anybody else. We also kept a price premium because we didn't want the lowest quality customer coming to us. So all of that was playing to the same strategy. Postpaid, which is the best quality customer, again became a very big area of focus. And I'll tell you one thing that not many people know. We have the leading position in postpaid. We have about a 60% market share in postpaid in India. 80% of our customers are on what's called family plans, which means if you've got the chief wage earner or one person in the family on a plan, they have 2 or 3 other people on the same plan. And what happens with that is the stickiness is very, very high. So the churn really crashes because if you want to move or switch the network, you've got to switch the whole family. It's a shareable allowance of data. You can roll over data. So 80% of our postpaid business actually works on family plans. So this was really the approach on being crystal clear about the customer segment we were going to target. So that was the second big thing for me as a lesson. The third big lesson was in an intangible service, which you can't touch, feel, and smell, how do you differentiate? And so the third big lesson was, what is the source of our differentiation? We are in a very unfortunate business. We are in a business where we are remembered when we fail. Unfortunately, we are not remembered when we work. That 1% of the time when we fail is when, everybody here would curse us, saying that this is the... And invariably, it's not sometimes our fault. It's the fault of the device or it's the fault of the application. But we are the ones that actually face the onslaught. So for us, there were 2 sources of differentiation. We said on experience, we've got to be the best. In these 245 districts, we've got to simply be the best network and the best experience. And we had to really ask ourselves, how do customers assess experience? Because historically, what you do is, if you look at any telco executive, they'll tell you that it's about speeds, right? And speed is not really relevant because when you're opening up a YouTube session, you want it to load up fast. When you're paying a bank online, you want it to work. You don't want it to fail just as you've gone through the full transaction. So we had to do a lot of engineering to say, for example, I'll give you 2 examples. YouTube's content, caching it within our data centers so that the data center that is sitting on YouTube in Silicon Valley or somewhere in the US, you don't need to make all of that journey to ask for that packet of data to serve it up on your phone. You actually serve it up fast. This is what's called, in telecom language, it's called latency. It's this time that it takes to boot up the page when you actually click the YouTube link. That we said we'll get better at. We tied up with the banks to say, if your application is failing, then my customer thinks it's the network. Let's work together to correct the problem. So we had to work with the banks to actually do all of this. So a whole bunch of things to really get the experience right was something that we had to be forced to do. And as a consequence, if you look at any externally sourced data, whether it is, there are many of them. There, people called OpenSignal. There's a company called Ookla. There's another company called Tutela. All of these companies would rate Airtel the best experience on all of these parameters, whether it's in gaming, video application, voice calling, etc., etc. Now, it's not that we are best. We are great, because I know if I were to meet you after this talk, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of complaints on the problems you face. But the fact is that we were probably the best of a bad bunch. The second source of differentiation is really around how do you craft the experience looking at all your technology. If you step back, I'll tell you how we think of Airtel. We think of Airtel in 3 layers. The first layer is the infrastructure layer. This is the digital infrastructure. This is our network, but more importantly, it's the data infrastructure. Data is a real gold mine. We have spent the last 5 years really building up the finest state-of-the-art data infrastructure layer, which 1,500 people, it's federated across, we have almost 2,000 attributes that we can look at on customers based on whether it's device, it's usage, it's applications, it's various things. And the response rate in which you can ask for and get a query is in milliseconds. Milliseconds is a fraction of a second. And therefore, this is one of the reasons why our average revenue per user is at least 18 to 20% higher than any other player in the industry. So this is the first part of our stack. The second part of our stack on the way we think of telecom is the digital experience layer. And you have to think of it from a customer's perspective. What do customers do? They buy stuff and you have to serve them stuff. Now, typically in telecoms, you have a lot of billing systems which are create an underlying complexity. What we've done is built these platforms on top of this complexity so that we simplify the journeys for our customers. So let me give you an example. Today we have 70,000 people. So the people who go to the houses to install a broadband or do a fault repair or go to a network site to actually repair it, all of them sit on one application, which is called Airtel Work, all 70,000, and all of it is monitored real time at the back through our network operating center. So the quality of the work, the authentication of the work, the scheduling of the work, all of that happens real time, all done through the Serve platform. And finally, the third layer is, if you do this well, you can create digital services, which means you can get more and more share of wallet of that customer. And so we have a bank. We do about 20,000 crores of throughput in the bank a month. It's the only profitable bank, fintech player in the space in India. We have a lending business. We haven't talked about it much, but we do about roughly around 3,000 crores of lending already on our platform. And again, that comes from the digital infrastructure layer, because we have so much of information that we have credit scored our customers and we are able to lend using partnerships with banks. We have a large data center business. We have another product called Airtel IQ. So let me give you an example. One of the big problems that, Mr. Balraman actually called me once and said, somebody's attempted to phish and take money and, fraud me on my phone. And that sparked off some thinking in us on our end to say, what can we do to help customers on phishing and spam and fraud? So we work with HDFC Bank to create an artificial intelligence-led anti-phishing, anti-spam shield on the core network. So as millions and messages are coming through the network, real time, we are blocking potential spam and phishing, and they've seen almost a 99% reduction in spam and phishing attacks. So these are the kind of things that we've tried to build using the same stack, which is the experience, infrastructure, experience, and services. So differentiation in a service that is quite intangible is the third big lesson that I would take out of all of this. And the last lesson I would call out is culture. I cannot underscore this more. You know, for us, if I were to define the culture of Airtel in just one word, then it is this: ownership. I think across the company, people feel it is their company, it is their money, they are empowered to actually do whatever it needs to be done to build the business. And this is where, when Mr. Balraman spoke about Mr. V. Narayanan and his leadership philosophy, I think this philosophy is something that's deeply ingrained in Airtel, which is a philosophy of ownership. But if I were to unpeel this and tell you how does it manifest itself, one aspect of ownership is frugality. You know, we have a program that we've been running for the last 11 years. And this program is not about cost reduction. We don't call it cost reduction. We call it a war on waste. Because when you say cost reduction, people start getting rather, tense, because it's almost like you're being questioned. But if you say it's about waste elimination, the ingenuity that you get from the teams to actually strip waste is dramatic. In the last 5 years, we have taken out $3 billion, almost 22,000 crores of waste from the system, reducing our network cost, reducing our call center cost, actually just stopping calls from happening in the first place. The second part of this ownership, which again I'll unpeel for you, is pace. You know, we are in a fast-paced industry, and you have to move fast in this industry. So one of the things we did very early on, and this is one of the first decisions that in hindsight I think was a good decision, was we stripped out one layer in the company. And so today the 14 circle units, which is the CEOs that are our heartbeat, and Tarun is one of them, all report into one chief operating officer. We don't have a layer in between, because we believe the circle CEO must be the most empowered general manager in the company, and one supervisor is more than enough to manage that. Which effectively means that you're not breathing down somebody's neck, you have full empowerment to actually run it. We also have this concept of rituals. So I'll give you an example. Today I was in a store in Annanagar, and we do this every morning with all our 2,500 stores. The 10 store staff will get together. They'll talk about the good customer stories of yesterday and the lousy customer stories of yesterday. And these customer stories will then get aggregated along with all the calling and all the patterns that we are seeing centrally. And we will try and say, can we structurally solve this for those problems, and report back to the store staff to say, this is what we're doing. This creates a sense of energy in the organization, and this is again, an example of pace. I believe my role as CEO is to be the glue between different functions and business units so that pace is achieved within the company. And wherever there are friction points, wherever there are cross-functional fracture points, my role is to say, how do we iron it out through more real and authentic conversations? And so we run rituals where every quarter we get together and talk about what's coming in the way of our leadership. And that is not a general discussion. It's based on surveys that are done by our teams qualitatively and quantitatively to say, how is this leadership team performing? Where can they help us to actually do our job better? And we have those conversations. And if you're doing it every 100 days and meeting again to discuss how we're going to change in the next 100 days, that generates a sense of pace and trust. And the last part of ownership, which again I want to talk about, is a culture of rigor. We have an incredible amount of data within the company. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is the rigor that we have within the company. So I'll give you an example. Today we have 280,000 towers, mobile towers across the country. Every single tower has a profitability for that tower. So we know the revenue of the tower, we know the cost of the tower, and we know the profitability of the tower. And you'll hear a lot of jargon within Airtel. One of the jargon is LRLU. That means low revenue, low utilization. So these are then identified as low profitability towers. And in fact, we've now taken that one step further. So the 2,500 stores that we have across the country are now divided into catchments. And each catchment has a grid. And a grid is literally 500 meters by 500 meters. Within the grid, we know exactly what the customer experiences, we know what our assets are, and what is it that the sales teams need to do, what is it that the network teams need to do, and the ground is then joined up to actually make that happen. So this rigor is another facet of the same ownership. So ownership comes in different aspects, whether it's frugality, it's pace, it's rigor, all of that is really about ownership. We have 3 words in Airtel which we use, and we talk about it often. In fact, all our emails get signed off like that, and those words are I am Airtel, which is really the symbol of that ownership. So with that, I'm going to stop. Any questions, I'd be happy to take.